of national income. In the previous class, we had studied certain basic concepts of return goods, again classification of goods as consumption goods and capital goods. Then again, how these capital and consumption goods are again classified as durable, non-durable, semi-durable, services, etc. Today we will be learning about few more concepts which are related to national income accounting, and they are one of the first one is depreciation. Now, as far as depreciation is concerned, it will be very convenient and easy for a commerce student to know what depreciation is, because they have been maintaining depreciation from reserve account, and they have learned about all these things in standard 11. Whereas for the humanities students, it is a little difficult because they have probably heard it for the first time, or even if they have heard it before, they may not be very active way how it's being used in the accounting sense. So, as far as depreciation is concerned, it is defined as fall in the value of fixed capital goods due to normal wear and tear and foreseen obsolescence. Now, I repeat the definition again, just hear it attentively. Depreciation is defined as fall in the value of fixed capital goods due to normal wear and tear and foreseen obsolescence. Let's understand. Fall in the value of fixed capital goods means the value of that capital good falls. Normal wear and tear, what do you mean by normal wear and tear? Fall in the capital good assets due to normal usage. When you use a capital good for a particular period of time, automatically there is a fall in the value of the capital good. This is called as normal wear and tear. And the second part is, the definition has two parts. It's fall in the value due to normal wear and tear and foreseen obsolescence. Foreseen means something which is predicted. For example, because of new technology, say a particular older technology gets obsolete because now you are going to use new technology. So this can be said as foreseen obsolescence. And when there is a fall in the value of the capital goods because of such foreseen obsolescence, it is also considered as depreciation. So children, we've seen that foreseen obsolescence is a part of depreciation. What about unforeseen? What about unforeseen obsolescence? Unforeseen obsolescence are what? Which are not predicted. For example, this earthquake or there is a theft. When there is a fall or loss in the value of capital goods due to unforeseen situations or unforeseen episodes which take up in the economy, they are called as capital loss. So capital loss and depreciation are two different things. It's foreseen, it's depreciation, then it's unforeseen, it's called as capital loss. Another point is, when we talk about depreciation and when you add up the values of the capital goods in an economy, including the value of depreciation means including that value which probably should be excluded because in a particular period of time that value of the capital good has fallen, but we have not excluded that value, then that valuation is called as gross. From this gross value, if you subtract the depreciation, that is the probable fall in the value of capital goods assets due to normal wear and tear and foreseen obsolescence, then what you get is net. So gross minus depreciation is equal to net. So probably children, you already are done with it. Now the second concept that we will be learning about is stock and flow. Stock and flow is probably not a new term that you come across, but when we apply it in accounting science to various variables, then you need to know the exact meaning of it and how it is to be applied. While calculating national income, there are various variables that you come across, like its income, its capital, its investment, stock, and so on. All these variables of national income accounting are classified, or they are classified under stock variable or flow variable. Let's see what is the definition of stock variables. Variables whose magnitude is measured at a particular point of time are called as stock variable. At a particular point of time, while variable whose magnitude is measured over a period of time are called flow variables. Measured at a particular point of time. Let's take an example. In the accounting sense, capital in an organization is measured at a particular point of time, probably at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year, say 31st March 2008. What is the capital in an organization as on 31st March 2008? Say it's 10 lakh. So 10 lakh is measured, 10 lakh, that is the capital, is measured at a particular point of time. Okay? Then what is the flow variable? Flow variable is something which is measured during a period of time. So again, the investment being made in the same organization during the financial year 9, that is from 31st March 2008 or 1st April 2008 to 31st March 2009, this investment which adds up to become capital is called as flow. So flow variable is any such variable which is measured during a period of time. Again, another example, income. Income earned during a particular month or for the period of month January. So that's a flow variable. Though we segregate these variables into stock and flow, they are very closely related. In fact, they both impact each other. Stock affects the flow and flow affects the stock. Let's take an example about capital again. When we talk about capital, capital actually leads, a good capital gives a good output in a particular firm. So capital is a stock concept, but the output produced by the firm is a flow variable. So a good capital, a high amount of capital will lead to high amount of flow of goods and services, that is flow of output. So output being flow. High output, high capital, high output. This output is used either for consumption or for investment. So again, out of this output, whatever is invested again comes back and gets added to capital. So just as capital impacts the flow also impacts the capital. Next is about economic territory. Economic territory. Now, economic territory should not be a very new term for you all, but probably you have not got to know the difference between the political frontier and the economic territory. What do you mean by political frontier? Political frontier is the entire land area within the boundary of a country. That entire entire land area within the political frontier is a part of India. That is what we understand. So what is the difference between political frontier and economic territory? See, there are certain land areas within India's political frontier which is not treated as India's economic territory, whereas there is certain land area not within the political frontier of our country but is treated as a part of economic territory. So what is that makes certain part of India not a part of Indian economic territory and certain part which is not in India but a part of economic territory? Let's listen the definition and understand. The economic territory or domestic territory, economic territory is also called as domestic territory, is defined as that geographic territory administered by the government within which persons, goods and capital circulate freely, within which person, goods, and capital circulates freely. Now, circulates freely means people are free to move around. So it's about person, goods are free to be transacted, and capital. The Indian rupee is freely circulated and people easily take it back. So any such area, any such place where the person, goods, and capital are circulated freely, that part, that area, that land is a part of India's economic territory. Let's see, when you talk about the domestic territory, it includes certain area, as I said, outside the political frontier and excludes certain area within the political frontier. Let's see what it includes and what it excludes. Like, the political frontier includes territorial water and airspace. The territorial water, which is usually, we say, 22.5 kilometers along the sea coast. That entire territorial water is also a part of India's economic territory. Beyond that, it's the international water. The airspace, the entire airspace above India or above our country is also, that airspace also forms to be a part of India's political frontier. The embassies, consulates, military bases, etc. located abroad, India, that is Indian embassy, Indian consulate, Indian military bases which are located abroad in different parts of the world, they all form a part of Indian economic territory, whereas the foreign embassies, foreign consulates, foreign military bases which are located in India are not a part of India's economic territory. The ships, the huge ships, the aircrafts which are owned by the residents and they move between two countries or two places, they are also a part of India's economic territory. The huge ship, even if that ship is not within India's territorial water, it's in the international water or it's quoted on the port of Japan, but still that the place within the ship will be part of India's economic territory, and the same applies to the aircraft if it's owned by the resident of India. We'll learn about resident next. Now, even the fishing vessels, oils and natural gas rigs, etc. operated by residents, in the international water or other areas over which the country enjoys exclusive rights is a part of India's economic territory. So, we are done with economic territory. Now we take up another important concept. So children, our next concept is residence. Why resident becomes a very important concept in national income? As I told you before, residence is an important concept. Because while calculating national income, only the measures of the values of economic activities carried out by the residents is taken into consideration. The non-residents' contribution to the economic activities are not taken into consideration while calculating the value of national income. Let's see how is it defined. A resident, whether a person or an institution, is one whose center of economic interest lies in the economic territory of the country in which he lives or is located. I repeat it again. Let's see what are the important points here. A resident, whether a person or an institution. So a resident can be a person or an institution, is one whose center of economic interest lies in the economic territory of the country in which he lives or is located. So, what do you mean by center of economic interest? Center of economic interest means, firstly, he lives or is located in the economic territory of the country about where he is resident of, and his economic interest means he earns, he spends, he saves and invests in that country. He carries out all his such kind of economic interests where he is located from. When these two criteria are fulfilled, we say that the person or an institution is resident of such a so and so country. There are certain examples to make it clear. Suppose the international organizations like International Monetary Fund Organization, World Health Organization, World Bank, these international organizations have their offices in different countries of the world. So these offices, are they resident of the country where they are established? No. These offices are resident of international organization. They do not belong to the country where they are established. What about the employees of international organizations? These employees would be resident of the country where they are actually located. They are the resident. For example, an Indian working in international organization office which is in America, this Indian would be a resident of India, because this Indian wouldn't be a resident of international organization but would be a resident of India. Why? Because he lives in India, his economic interest is in India. Means he carries out all his economic activities from India. What about the foreign visitors who visit under the pretext of maybe medical tourism or for study purpose or for leisure purpose? What about them? Are they the resident of the country where they are visiting? No, they are also not resident of the country where they are visiting, but they will be resident of the country where they belong to. They have come here only as tourists. What about Indians employed in World Health Organization located in India? Yes, if Indians are employed in the World Health Organization, the office of which is located in India, they would still be resident of India. So, children, there are like some questions here I pose up. Are the following residents of Indian economy? First, Indians employed in the World Health Organization located in India. Yes, they are. We've already taken up. An American tourist staying in India? No, he wouldn't be a resident of India. Indian working in the USA Embassy in India? Would he be a resident of India? Again, I repeat, an Indian working in USA Embassy in India. Would he be a resident of India? Yes, he is still a resident of India. So children, next our concept is about transfer payment. Children, while measuring national income, again the concept of transfer payment is very important, because transfer payments are kept outside the ambience of calculation of national income. While calculating national income, only and only factor income is taken into consideration and not transfer income. But then what is transfer income? Let's see how it's being defined. Transfer Transfer is a transaction in which the payer provides goods, services, or an asset without receiving from the recipient any goods, service, or asset in return. I repeat again, transfer is a transaction in which the payer provides a good, service, or an asset without receiving from the recipient of these any good, service, or asset in return. For example, I provide a gift of rupees 50,000 to my brother and do not expect any good or service or the same money being returned back to me. This would be a kind of transfer payment. To make it more clear, let us go through certain more examples. Gift made to anybody, even to an employee, is a part of transfer income and thus would not be taken into account while calculating national income, because it's not a factor income. While calculating national income, we take into account only the factor income. What about donations, charity made by the government to the people? Even that would be a part of transfer income. What about the scholarship given to the students? Yes, that is also a transfer income, because the scholarship amount when given to the student is not again obliged to do something back to the government. What about payment of taxes to the government? Yes, it is also a kind of transfer payment, because there is no contract between the government and the taxpayer that once the taxes are paid, government is compulsorily required or obliged to do something back to the taxpayer. Thus, all kind of tax payments are kind of transfer payments. Thank you.